The Tycoon series is at it again, this time with a new PC game called Museum Tycoon Manzanar Edition.
Expanding on the concepts of other games in the series, Museum Tycoon puts you in the place of a museum designer at Manzanar, the location of an internment camp for Japanese Americans during World War II.
Over 100,000 Japanese Americans were interned at Manzanar, and this game gives you the chance to create a National Historic Museum for the site. Sure, it sounds boring, but trust us, it's not easy or bland.
Almost half a century after the events at Manzanar, you are a museum architect. Using the different artifacts and narratives either donated or purchased by your benefactors, you must design the museum building, determine which artifacts to place emphasis on, manage your budget, and manage the happiness of the stakeholder groups. Can you handle it? A handful of different individuals called stakeholders are interested in the historic presentation of Manzanar, and you must decide who to please and how to do it. Museum Tycoon features great graphics, colorful and detailed. They really reel in a younger audience and help to buffer against some of the heavier educational topics addressed within the game. There's also a lot of variety in how you can visually approach your exhibit. Gamers are able to enjoy a sweeping bird's-eye view of the entire Manzanar site to observe changes in the visitor flow, then switch to the perspective of the visitor to zoom in on your own exhibits. This variety is key in terms of this game, since gamers are confined to a fairly limited amount of space when creating and dismantling their exhibits.
The graphic detail in some of the artifacts is truly remarkable. The Japanese pottery and the collections of photographs, for instance, are very well recreated and add to the historic value and accuracy of the game.
Also, the game lets you know what visitors think of your site by supplementing the characters with frequent thought or speech bubbles, and even emoticons. The thought bubbles help you gauge each visitor's thought process as he engages in the particular exhibits you've created. Is he agreeing with your messages? What does he think the display is missing? Is he finding some displays more interesting or more valuable than another?
The frequent visitor feedback really adds a human touch to the virtual stakeholders and give you a feel for how hard it can be to satisfy all stakeholders when presenting history. Museum Tycoon is making a game out of existing stakeholder communities that are very much alive and diverse. There's a fine line between presenting their clashes in simple, kid-friendly ways and simplifying the stakeholders to the extent that they don't seem real anymore. I think the creators did a pretty good job of recognizing this distinction. To begin the game, players get $1 million to try and start designing their museum. As they design it, they will not only choose the blueprints, but also the interior designs as well.
Once the initial museum is built, you have the option to choose from certain artifacts to display. As your museum prospers and you earn monetary donation from your visitors, you'll be able to acquire more artifacts and your choices will become more varied.
You can choose from a wide range of authentic Japanese American artifacts found at Manzanar, as well as many first-person narratives. Each will come with its own historical blurb for a caption, and you as the player will have complete control over where to place each artifact. You could satisfy radical pro-American war veterans, new generation Japanese Americans, or many other groups.
The placement of each artifact will have certain consequences that come with it. You do want to please your visitors because that is where most of your income will be, but certain artifacts will have a different effect on each stakeholder tied to it. A pot made at Manzanar, for example, will satisfy older generations of Japanese Americans.
Of course, while Manzanar may be a place of 10,000 stories, not every story can be represented equally. For example, if you appease a Japanese American stakeholder group, you can receive more narratives and artifact donations. If you appease patriotic American stakeholder groups, you can receive more research grants and larger donations.
Making one stakeholder group happy might just make another one upset, however, so part of your job is to try and balance them out. This is especially difficult given the diversity of stakeholders within ethnic groups, such as old or new age Japanese Americans. Each stakeholder will have happiness bars at the bottom of the screen for you to try and keep track of. Of course, in the real world, balancing stakeholder requests is even more complex than represented in Museum Tycoon Manzanar Edition. While the game offers a refreshing educational element to the established Tycoon game genre, it does get tedious after a few hours of gameplay. So what do you do after you've achieved your ideal museum? The game makers seem to assume that players will carry on managing the museum, but in reality, the repetitive scenarios do get, well, repetitive. Of course, players do have the option of starting the game over to manage the museum differently and achieve a new ending.
So the basic idea of the gameplay itself may sound simple, but it may be harder than it looks. Museum Tycoon Manzanar Edition is all age friendly, but we recommend it for those ages 10 and up. Unfortunately, the concept of the game is a bit overambitious and needs to be simplified to be accurately represented to the recommended age range. On the other hand, it's a great expansion of the Tycoon series.
Overall, we would rate this game an 8.5 out of 10. The presentation provides educational appeal to children, the complexity of satisfying stakeholders is very engrossing, and it's always interesting to see how different presentations can lead to different results.